Due to the length of this audio drama, I'm going to make this introduction as short as I can. I would like to thank my voice actors who I hired for this, and if you want to have it on your screen, I included video game footage that I edited so that there's something to actually watch. And I hope you enjoy the audio drama. It's one of the few short stories that I've actually ever finished writing, and that's why I'm so proud of it. That's why I got it voice acted. But anyways, hope you enjoy.
Hey there, friend. If you enjoy poetry, fan fiction, and other original stories, you're in the right place. If you enjoy the analysis of poetry and longer prose, you're in the right place. So grab a drink, sit back, and enjoy as we at the Chaos Universe indulge you in a tale.
A busy night at the market. People rushing back and forth shopping for their loved ones. Unknown, up above, in the rafters, was a person watching them, confident that no one would look up. No one ever did, though. If someone had decided to look up into the above, the shadows would hide the person. All of this combined is what the person, Jessic, found extremely humorous. People were busy buying armloads of shopping bags. To Jessic, the way they ran from store to store reminded her of how a headless chicken runs around with no objective. This mindless running around never quite made any sense to her. It seemed that they were all just following random overload commands. She watched a long time before she couldn't stand the stupidity of the situation. Shaking her head, she began to crawl along the walls of the building, heading towards the roof. After making sure no one would see her from the center of the building's roof, Jessic began to do some exercising. Putting her arms perpendicular to the ground, she started moving the left arm to her front, while moving the right arm to the back. She did this while counting the times till 20. Following this up, she touched her toes and reached for the sky. Debating whether or not she should do skipping as part of her stretches, she finally decided that those underneath would hear her, and that would be unwise. So instead, she did 30 crunches, and finally, she did 40 sit-ups. Once she was done doing her stretches, she ran across the building and jumped towards the next building. Grabbing a hold of the bottom fire escape, she pulled herself up, smiling. She climbed up the fire escape, glad that it wasn't an apartment building, and it was doors, not windows, leading to the fire escape. She hated people watching her and judging her like she was a no-good crook. Her past, whether it be good or bad, made her who she was, and that was something she had been proud of since she was a preteen. Okay, Suit, let's try this. There's a full block of rooftops here, before the edge, and the jump this time. You think that'll be a good plan? I do too, Jessic stated, with a slight giggle to her voice. She hunched into a runner's strutting position before she bolted at top speed for the other end of the building. There was a certain freedom, adventure, and excitement that this individual found in doing parkour. Pushing herself as hard as she could was one of her favorite things, and really the only way she could tell if she was truly alive. Her shoulder-length, crimson, fire-red hair glistened in the evening light as it flew behind her. A nice bounce off the streetlight and a barrel roll at the end made her run smoothly and seamlessly. Having to stop would have made Jessic mad, due to him meaning that she would have to restart her training exercise, which in turn would cause her to have to restart her fun. One thing that was drilled into her was that knowing how to exercise properly was always a good thing. She had learned that for her, There was nothing better to keep in shape than roof hopping. At least, that's what Jessic would tell people, if she talked to people. An hour into the run, Jessic stopped and whipped her brow. Slowly, she moved from roof to roof, making sure to pay more attention to the streets. Now that she was well ready for it, she could start the second part of her training regimen. The people here were just trying to go from one place to another. The few people that were out and about at this hour were probably going home. That meant that the criminals would consider them easy prey. People that were by themselves, with no one nearby, were always the easiest ones to become hunted. Jessica giggled at the thought of hunting the hunters. It always seemed amusing. It took some time searching for something interesting to occur. At first, one wouldn't think a petite old lady walking through an alley would be interesting, but they would be right. This was interesting, however, because of the young punk dressed in black spiked leather, brandishing an oversized pistol at her. The old lady had her hands up in the air and was obeying the punk criminal as he slowly ordered her to hand over things. Jessic resisted the urge to make a noise of disgust. A quick look around the alley and the options were considered. Her first option would be to crawl down the wall, but that would take too long. Second option would be to try jumping from side to side and getting down that way. Jessic sighed heavily. Therefore, if Jessic wanted to help the civilian keep her goods and save her life, she would need to be quicker than the first two options. Thankfully for Jessic, those two options were not the only option. There, in fact, was a third, quicker option. She jumped straight down from the roof, hitting her target. Landing square on the criminal's shoulders, Jessic bounded gracefully and twisted in the air so that she could land facing the old lady. Their response was her to shriek and run off, probably going to the nearest member of the pacification force. Suit, no one cares about us heroes these days. Jessic deadpanned. She quickly moved over to the corpse, being extremely careful. She picked up the criminal's cash and pocket phone. She pocketed the reward and then wall jumped back to the roof. She started running for 5 minutes before hiding under a water tower. She laid across the roof and turned on the cloaking function of the suit. The whir of helicopters became loud. The pacification force were either always looking for people who did their job, or people who committed crime. Though to their defense, in their eyes, they were the same thing. They didn't like criminals, and murder was technically a crime. So the helicopters, by the sounds of it, 3 of them, did one sweep. Then they did several more. Time crawled, and the moons were all up in the sky before they finished hunting down for the person who murdered the spiked leather man in the alleyway. Jessic rolled out from under the tower and started running. Roof jumping, taking any shape of routes that would be less traveled, but to and including her ducking through the construction zones. Just making sure not to stop. This time, though, the key was to get home unseen. The problem was that during the nights the pacification force were out in more force than during the day. They didn't want any of the criminals gaining any type of foothold. The government was truly paranoid and ruthless in the pursuit for anyone who didn't do what they were told. The construction zones with the half-finished buildings really came in handy at times to hide, whether it be behind a wall or under a stack of building materials. Though with the patrols, she never had to hide for more than 10 minutes. 4 hours was the length of time it took her to run to the run-down apartment building that had her home in it. She went inside where the side door was and made her way up the stairs, occasionally having to cross one of the other 2 stairwells due to damage. Making it to the top, Jessic crept out onto the roof. Heading very slowly and carefully to the edge of the roof, She jumped down to the first landing of the fire escape and dove through the pitch-black curtains. Coming out of the roll and standing up, a smile for a good day. A nice workout and a crime prevented. The fact that she had found a crime was lucky. Walking carefully, she lit the oil lamp and looked around her pad. Back when this building was in its heyday, this room was a studio, one large room with a bathroom attached. A painter or a bachelor probably had this place 30 years ago. She took off her running suit, tossing it in a pile of dirty clothes. As she then took off her biosuit, she checked the pile of clean clothes, and took note of there only being 2 pairs of clean running suits left, which meant that in 2 days she would have to figure out a way to do laundry, but that was a problem for another time. I was hoping to not have to feed you today, but stealth mode always makes you hungry. Good thing we didn't have to use it too much. Hope you're hungry. Jessic stated point blank. Laying the biosuit carefully over a chair, she realized the mistake she made. Going to the dirty clothes pile, she took out the money and pocket phone. She tossed the pocket phone onto her biosuit and, like always, was mesmerized. For the fabrics of the suit shot out and wrapped around the pocket phone, and slowly broke the electronic parts down till all that was left was a plastic husk that fell to the floor. She was really glad she had never had to feed the suit while inside it. It always looked like it would be a pain to feed the suit while it was being worn. The husk was moved to the countertop as a cabinet and a can of beans opened. Jessic enjoyed her supper/early breakfast. Once finished, the can and spoon was washed, and the garbage got tossed in the growing pile that blocked her doorway. Then the spoon was placed back on the countertop. Heading to the bathroom, a bath was poured, and a bath was taken. A solid 10 minutes was taken to make sure that every nook and cranny was clean. Climbing out of the tub, a towel was wrapped around the hair and another used to dry the body. After the body was dried, the second towel went around her chest, and she walked out into the other room. Before blowing out the lamp, she sighed and looked at the biosuit.
Look, I'm sorry. We both didn't get what we wanted. I will try and make sure you get a proper meal tomorrow.
6 hours later, she rolled off the couch and put the towels away. Getting dressed was the first order of business, followed by seeing how much change she had snagged from the crook yesterday. Thankfully, it was more than enough for what she needed. Placing the change in a pocket, she headed out the fire escape and downward. The fact that she needed to jump down due to the lack of the ladder was something that she was completely used to. Once at street level, she was walking for a good 25 minutes before she reached her first destination. She headed into this branch location called Ken's House of Coffee.
I will have a large 2 cream, 2 sugar evil roast.
She communicated to the old woman who was behind the till. Before fumbling with the change, she made a point to slowly count out the money that was owed, and placed it one by one on the counter. Even though being slow might cause some of the customers behind to become upset, she would rather be precise than hurried. She offered the cashier a weak smile afterwards, and took her coffee. Sitting by herself at the window, she watched as a few people walked on by. It was too late in the morning for everyone to be heading to work. Most of the people who were walking were those that were going on business trips, or students heading to midday classes. Taking her time, drinking her coffee, she didn't really have much to do today, though that didn't mean that there wasn't any plans. Having to not rush through things, there was a time to run and there was a time to watch the world pass. Knowing the difference between the two was something that Jessic had mostly figured out. The clock slowly ticked away until the hour hand was past 10, and the minute hand was at the 6. Then she washed out her paper cup and headed out, hoping no one had taken her usual spot. the spots where she would sit for the next 6 hours. Luck was on her side today. Her spot on the corner between 4 office towers was empty. Her spot, due to how the buildings lined up, was slightly out of the way and always out of the sun, so it was a prime location. She knew that 1100 hours to 1300 were busy, due to everyone going to lunch. The people might or might not give her change on their way to and from lunch. This was always a gamble, but Jessic would never ask for the money. People get upset and yell when they are pestered by every bum and panhandler every 20 feet. Knowing how to look helpless, hopeless, and in need of money is important for any homeless panhandler. There were some people that said hi and gave her a few cents here and there. Some of these people were her regular customers, as much as a begging man can have customers. Time was slow to pass, like always, but Jessica kept her mind active by watching people go to and from where they were going. She made stories about people based on how they were dressed and how they held themselves. It's amazing the accuracy of what one can read and insert in people with little effort. Though when the crowds died down after lunch, less effort could be spent on this endeavor due to less people being on the street, and Jessic could study them more discreetly than when people were blocking her line of sight. Eventually, the workday ended and people headed home. The difference between heading home and the lunch rush was that people moved faster. Not wanting to be at work or be called back to work, they did their best to get as far away from work as possible. This yielded a lot less people giving money. Sometimes no one would. If you left, though, the small chance of getting more money from looking pathetic was completely lost for you. Jessic could not let that chance go. The day had been average, not a lot of money. She went into the Bateman Mall, specifically the food court, a public place where she could count the money and figure out how much she had so that she could plan to get to eat something tonight. Food was very important for survival purposes. She smiled at the amount she had. Placing the money in a safe, locked inner pocket, the terrace was her next goal, for there was a quiet and peaceful area on the terrace over the chaos of the shoppers. There one could sit under a tree and watch the clouds go by for minutes or hours without having any cares in the world. One could forget how harsh life was. Jessic needed this in her life. It was the one thing that let her forget the trouble of her past. After the sun had moved across the sky, Jessic finally got up and bought groceries. Carrying them home, the only difficult part was getting the groceries up to her room, due to there being a bit of difficulty carrying the groceries up the fire escape. Once there, though, she had a hot dog bun, a can of corn, and washed it down with a glass of water before putting on her bioenhancement suit. Time to fight the good fight. It hadn't been overly difficult to get up to her spot, on top of the grocery store. Laying across the roof, she watched the building across the street. That building resembled a cylinder cut in half and laid flat on the ground, similar to some military barracks with a blue-green roof. This particular building that was being washed was an older movie theater, one built before they got standardized. She had done a lot of running around tonight, lots of exercise, but so far it was a quiet night. This was actually normal. Boring, but normal for Jessic. Crime was hard to catch in the act when you didn't have a specific radio, one that was on the same frequencies as the one that cops used. Usually, the most she could hope for was to find a mugging. That is why she had taken a small break to wait for this particular movie theater's last showings to get out, and she didn't know what she would do then. Maybe follow some of the people on their way home. This was not the smartest thing that could be done, but Jessic had tried all her normal activities. None of them had panned out for her. While thinking outside the box, while unorthodox, in theory could pay off. This setup, while having a low chance of working, could still lead to her finding a crime in progress. Jessic hated to gamble in this manner, but push had come to shove. While checking with the suit, she learned that it was nearing the credits of the movie showing. Doing the best not to fidget, she tapped her fingers on the edge of the roof to the beat of a song she knew. Halfway through the second song, people started to file out of the movie theater. While most of them got into their vehicles, a few had walked to the theater, and therefore were walking home. A group of 5 friends interested Jessic, so she jumped off the roof to follow the people. Being stealthy meant that she had to be careful and stay out of sight, not only of the people she was following, but also of everyone on the streets. In Jessic's mind, criminals were weird individuals. They were cowards who would only strike against people they knew would be easy targets. Yet, on the other hand, they were bold enough to commit crimes in a city where the officers wore powered exoskeleton suits. They were cowards with balls, or completely insane. Either way worked. It never quite dawned on her that being a person who hunts down people who might be completely insane, because it was good exercise, might themselves be insane. Avoiding the pacification force was the tricky part, and Suit was running at full power to avoid them by traveling on the ground. While tracking people on foot, it was easy to follow on the ground, versus the act of parkouring. One had to be moving fast while they were partaking in that activity, and moving fast did not help with stalking people. On the other hand, rooftops tend to be outside the range of the sensors of the pacification force ground troops. Jessic had decided that the benefits of the ground outweighed the benefits of the rooftops. While the 5 people meandered along, making Jessic's task of stalking them take longer than acceptable for the standards set. Patience was strained as Suit's power slowly drained the small amount it had left. An agonizing 5 blocks before they dropped off one of the females at the door to her apartment building. 1 down, 4 to get home safely. Half an hour later, there were still 3 of them, and they were meandering along. It was bothersome to Jessic. While she waited between the sneaking, she couldn't help but pace back and forth, waiting for them to stop looking into every store or restaurant window, chit-chatting about what they could see in the closed shops. It was unnerving to Jessic how slow they were.
Suit, why couldn't they just walk straight to where they are going instead of waiting for them to talk along the way? Why do they have to be slow morons and be stupid to not shop when the shops are open? Could they be doing that just to stress me out, make me go insane? Nah, they couldn't be doing that. No one is smart enough to see you when you're stealthy. They're just stupid. I get it.
They continued on into the night, time ticking by slowly. Eventually they all got home, and no one tried to rob them. Plan E was then enacted to get the energy that was needed for the suit to be powered up. Jessic headed towards the nearest construction site, and used parkour to sneak into the site. Heading over to the big crane, Jessic crawled up the side of the machine. She moved to the engine compartment, jury-rigging it open. Grabbing a hold of the battery, it took all of the willpower to hold on. It felt as weird as she thought it would feel. The best way to describe it would be as if 1,000 fire ants were crawling through the veins, eating every single blood cell on their way through the body. Bolting awake caused enough dust to fly and clog the airway temporarily, resulting in a coughing fit. Looking around the empty room, with boarded-up windows and dust everywhere, a quick and accurate decision was made that this was most likely an abandoned building. Closing her eyes, she began to think of how she got here. She remembered the suit, at minimum, eating the electronics of the crane, bulldozer, and cement mixer. She didn't remember dragging herself to a nearby abandoned building, though she knew that it must have taken every last ounce of her power to achieve. She had no idea of how long she had been out, but she did know that the suit was full. That was always a good thing. She silently cursed her last stupid plan. The amount of light coming through the opening between the boards of light led to a very strong hypothesis that it was probably night, and a moonless one at that. The only light was from a few streetlights. She stood up, slowly stretching her body as it ached. Heading out of the room, she finds a broken window and learns she's on the second story of the building. A few moments are needed for the eyes to adjust to the light outside. After a short crawl to the roof, it was done, followed by the routine of stretching. Parkour, for Jessic, tended to have the effect of losing one's focus, and also helped and focus one's mind on the job of hunting criminals. Though this activity takes more than a few hours to work, eventually, like always, it works. Once it works, Jessic stops and begins to look around for criminals. Blocks away from where the hunt started, the sound of breaking glass caused a very fast reaction. In a short time, the scene of a man having broken into a bank and destroyed the ATM was seen. Busy picking up all the money on the ground, no attention was paid to the rest of the world. All of this allowed Jessic to sneak up behind the guy and kick him hard between the legs. Jessic knew that banks like to keep an eye on their money, but she wasn't worried about the camera in the corner. Always looking down at the ground, tied with the fact that she was a street person, made it a good bet that they wouldn't be able to track her down. On the other hand, the money had been pried out of the machine was tempting to take for oneself. Shaking her head, she turned to leave the bank. Stopping at the entrance, Jessic looked around the street. A shadow moves on a roof, but when Jessic looks again, the shadow has disappeared completely. Staring at the rooftops for a few moments, Jessic storms back into the bank. Upset, she picked up the man by his hair and kicked him twice more. Satisfied he had learned his lesson, she briefly closed her eyes. The night had been good to Jessic. More than a couple criminals out tonight. She had spotted one more, a person standing near a car with a crowbar. He looked around, but like most people, never looked up. Never saw Jessic watching him from the rooftop. This caused a smile to cross her face as she used the narrowness of the alleyway to jump side to side. This allowed a quick, but more importantly, a quiet descent to the street. Waiting until the criminal was busy jamming the bar between the door and the window, trying to get the door open. Swift and silent, Jessic crossed the distance. Once there, she grabbed his hair, lifted his head, and slammed it down on the hood of the car. 3 times. The body slumped into a neat little pile, very similar to someone who had just disrobed and tossed their clothes in the corner. On the roof, the shadow, which was just out of the line of sight, appeared again. Every time she had stopped, or a crime had been fought, the shadow had appeared. Jessic was never able to find it when she looked. It would disappear when one tried to find the shadow. Knowing you're being followed for more than a day, but not being able to spot the person following you, is enough to drive you completely insane. Jessic took off at full force, jumping from building to building. 5 buildings down, she used the building's lip to spring herself backwards at full speed. Landing and spinning around, she came face to face with her stalker. A black, full environmental exoskeleton greeted her. Growling, a demand left Jessic's lip. To know who in Sharon was stalking her.
Jessic. Jessic. Jessic!
A worried, motherly tone spoke.
You know, all is forgiven. You can come back home, my dear.
The exoskeleton cautiously walked forward, the body language portraying a non-confrontational manner. Even with the friendly manner, The motherly tone and being forgiven, Jessic wanted none of it.
I don't have a home. You just want to experiment on me and take away my only friend. You're monsters, disguised as normal people.
Jessic retorted with violent hatred. She lowered herself into a crouching stance. As the exoskeleton slowly approached, very little movement was taken. Waiting for the right moment, the perfect moment to strike would, but until then, patience was required.
It's sad to see you hate your family, who only want what's best for you.
The exoskeleton's tone is not changing, still caring as she walks closer and closer to Jessic. Its arms were open, like a mother who only wants to hug her long-lost child. Her head tilted ever so slightly to the left.
You're evil,
Jessic stated as she leaped forward onto her hands. Using her hands to push herself up and hold herself, she grabbed the neck of the exoskeleton with her feet. Turning them slightly to get a good grip, she yanked hard. A smile crossed Jessic's face as she flipped the exoskeleton over her, catching it off guard. If she were to bet, she would put money on the fact that she was too far to strike with her hands in a more conventional manner. Not wasting a moment, Jessic took off, running like her life depended on it, pushing the suit and herself to the utter maximum of her abilities. Hoping against all logic that she could get away, luck only held for 2 rooftops. Then, without warning, the exoskeleton dropped down in front of her.
Come back home, Jessic.
Instead of stopping, Jessic turned so that she ran off the rooftop. Using a tree to bounce off and change her direction, she rolled off the roof of a bus stop and ran down the stairs of an underground subway station. Rolling under the gates and springing down the next flight of stairs, Jessic took less than half a moment to look around. Then, bolting across the tracks to the next platform, she heard the train coming and kept pushing herself. Jumping as the train entered the station, her right foot getting struck by the train caused her to spin wildly. Crashing down on the platform, she pulled herself up. Leaning on a pillar, she looked down at the mangled mess. Looking at the exit on the other side, she attempted to walk. The pain itself nearly caused her to collapse. She leaned against the pillar and thought of a way to win, a way to escape the experimentation that she was sure awaited her. Nothing came to her, and she felt time slowly tick by. Eventually, an indeterminate amount of time passed before the exoskeleton flew down the stairwell. Landing before Jessic, a sigh escaped it.
We care about you. We want you to be well. Now will you come peacefully, now that you can't run?
Jessic stared at the approaching being and knew she was out of time. Out of options, she only really had one last move to make before she would be returned to the family.
You're evil,
Jessic spat with vile, as she used her good leg and her arms to push herself, with all of her might, off the platform and onto the track, right in front of an incoming express train. She knew that the driver couldn't stop in time, and hoped that the exoskeleton was not fast enough to do anything. In her last moments, she was finally, truly fulfilled, finally at peace, as the train ran her over.